Hello, thank you for joining us. So, we are getting started with our presentation today. We'll give it just a minute or two for people to jump on, but glad you could make it here. This is our Lunch and Learn. It's a part of our property management training series with Community Investment Corporation. And what we aim to do is support owners of rental property and prospective owners, support them by providing information that can help them to be successful in their business. We want to help with awareness and compliance of laws, and we also want to help with building best practices for business. So let's see, we have a few people joining in. Okay, and I'm looking, we're just a minute past the hour, so I'm going to give it maybe a couple more minutes for people to jump on. I know it's lunchtime and people are trying to make it to their desk and get settled. So while I have you here, let me just again tell you a little bit more about some things that we have coming up. Of course, today we have our webinar on pet policies and assistance animals. We're really interested to hear the content here. We have some other sessions coming up. We have another free webinar that talks about how owners can help residents of their buildings avoid the eviction process. So that'll be coming up in a few weeks. We have another one. We're based in Chicago. So we have the Cook County Sheriff's Office, actually the superintendent of the Cook County Sheriff's Office, coming to tell us about how to navigate the eviction process for owners. Of course, that's something that you always want to avoid that, but in cases where it can't be avoided, it's important for owners to be equipped with the information to be able to do that effectively. We also have a property management training book club series, a virtual book club series that'll be starting next week. So we have a couple titles coming up. One is Real Estate 100, and this talks about how to talk to teens and millennials about investing in real estate. It's never too early to start to learn and to prepare yourself, so you can find out about that. And then starting in September, we have a book club. We'll be reading a book called The South Side: Chicago and American Segregation, and that's by Natalie Moore. So if you are a Chicago resident, especially from the South Side, you might be interested to hear how housing policies have affected the development of the South Side. So that's what we have coming up. I'll share with you a QR code in just a minute to help you link to our site. But we are Community Investment Corporation. You can reach our site at CICchicago.com. Okay, so we are 4 minutes past the hour, so let's go ahead. I'm going to do a brief intro, and then I don't want to take up too much time because Victoria has so much interesting information to share with us. So let me just share my screen and show you what we're doing today. So this is a presentation. The title of it is I Do/Don't Accept Animals in My Rentals, What to Know About Pet Policies and Assistance Animals. And I intentionally titled this webinar that way just because there are some owners who have pet policies in place. They allow animals, and that's great. And then there are some owners who say, oh, no, I do not allow animals in my building. That's just a no-no. That's a deal breaker. If an applicant comes to me who has an animal, I'm just going to turn that down. And what we want to talk about is, are we in the position to have a firm stance on that and say that is what we do? So a little bit about community invest. Oh, and we are glad to be joined by Victoria Coward, who is the Director of Education for Pet Screening, and she's going to be sharing that some answers to questions for us. Okay, so we are a Community Investment Corporation. We are a mission-driven lender, and we are based in Chicago, as I mentioned. We're very excited to be enjoying our 50th anniversary as an organization this year. We've been in Chicago helping small family-owned businesses, and we help developers to provide affordable housing in our communities. What I do with Community Investment Corporation is that I am in charge of our property management training program. We offer two formats, both virtual and in-person property management training. And we have a lot of additional programs to support owners and independent developers. We're celebrating 25 years of providing property management training. So you can scan that QR code that you see there. And you can also, again, go to our website, which is CICchicago.com, and check us out there. That's me. I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Manager here. And the biggest piece of what I do is I am the facilitator of those in-person training workshops that we have. So we would love it if you go to our website, check out our schedule, and join us for something coming up. All right, so let me stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Victoria. Okay.
Hello, Erica. Thank you for all that amazing information and introduction. I'm going to go ahead and take it away if the timing's right for you. Perfect.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. I have a background in property management. I spent 35 years managing apartment communities, both conventional and subsidized, mobile home communities, and even that teaches you a lot in terms of patience. Everything is a learning experience, and I hope today will be just that for your attendees. I facilitate this session. I call it You Bet Your Assets, because the double entendre is intended. When you're engaging in fair housing, you are betting your personal and professional assets on your understanding of the whole fair housing piece. And this, which we sometimes refer to as furry fair housing, is the #1 HUD complaint topic. So I congratulate all of your attendees for attending this session. It will hit, obviously, if that's the #1 HUD complaint topic, a very important topic. Erica, for your knowledge, I also facilitate a magical math of property management, helps people understand operating statements, cash flow statements, physical and economic occupancy, how to calculate the value of their budgetary suggestions as they're working through budget formation, utilizing calculations such as payback period and return on investment. And the last piece of that one that I love so very much is the intersectionality between NOIs, property values, and cap rates, because it teaches everybody the dollar value impact of their choices and decisions and their functions and how well they're functioning, good or bad, on the property value. Because if you're owning an asset, at the end of the day, you do want that asset to improve in value. And lastly, for your knowledge and for your attendees, also facilitate a mental health certification curriculum. It is an 8-hour curriculum, and it certifies folks, think CPR, but for the mind, certifies your attendees to be certified mental health first aiders. And it's an invaluable skill set to have with you and to add to your toolbox, especially in today's rental act. I spent many years working on site in my Section 8 apartment communities, and I wish I had known this in all of my communities, conventional and subsidized. It's something that I've taken on now that I've come to the supplier side. So with that, I'll say I work for Pet Screening, and we are the rental property management industry, both short-term, long-term, single-family, multifamily, military housing, manufactured housing, student housing. We are the industry's partner, leading partner, to help you with all things pet policy and assistance animal management. Our work has great risk and revenue and data and business intelligence benefits for our clients, and we're in over probably 6.5 million rentals at this time, Erica. And so through the course of our work, we've learned a lot. Through the course of the work I used to do and am continuing to do now, I've learned a lot, and I'm happy to be here to share that with you all. And I'm sure I'll learn from your questions. So on that note, as soon as a question occurs to you, please feel free to pop that in Q&A. Reserve chat for just something that you're just sort of interest wanting to share with the group. If you have a question for me, pop that in Q&A as soon as you think about it. While we're together learning a session like this, the more that you are listening and watching and taking notes and asking a question as soon as it occurs to you, the better your comprehension and retention rates will be for the future. Additionally, I've asked Erica to share with you all a link to our workbook that will connect you to future learning. That's like the gorilla glue for any time you attend a learning session, reviewing it in the following week to 10 days, reviewing any of the components, even just for a few minutes a day, for a few days over the course of the next week. That'll just glue all of that for you, all of today's information for you, because generally when you attend a session like this, you lose 80% and retain 20. That's bad math. So we want to flip those around. So Erica has a link to the workbook for you. And then she's also going to pop in a link to our survey about this session. So if you would provide me with your feedback, I would be most appreciative. My time today here is as a courtesy to CIC. And if you'll offer me the courtesy of your feedback, then we'll both be learning and growing today, and that will be wonderful. All right, let's get going. My personal motto is communicate, educate, activate, and in that specific order, right? Let's get our education and communication on and then activate in the whole area of fair housing. There too is a QR code for that workbook because I do want to make sure you get it. We are going to hit, obviously, all the topics that one would assume we would hit with a fair housing session, right? We're going to hit that human and animal statistics, fair housing statistics, and information. Assistance animal accommodation is going to be the focus of the discussion. And we're going to include in that the request journey, the process, and the outcomes as well. One of the reasons I always answer when people ask me, Victoria, why do we see so many more assistance animal accommodation requests than we used to see? Even just as little as 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we did not see the number of requests we are seeing today. The first place I go to answer that question are the human and animal statistics in our country. I think they will illuminate this topic for you as well. First, of course, I want to share that we realize that we have a growing number of disabled adults and children in the country. We have 26% of our adults living with a physical disability. Prior to COVID, we would have 1 in 10 adults raise their hand and say they too were living with a mental or emotional disability. That number has now risen from 1 in 10 to 4 in 10. So 26% adults living with a physical disability, 40% of adults living with a mental or emotional disability or substance use disorder. Those numbers mean we have a population, and again, we're not even talking about the stats on children, but those numbers alone mean that we have a population that is seeking treatment for their disabilities in one form or another, or in several forms. And one form often is an assistance animal. Now, let's talk about the assistance animal and pet statistics. First off, we are a pet-loving country, possibly like no other. 70% of homes in this country have a pet in them. And I'll always say pet or assistance animal because I don't believe those surveys differentiate between those two, right? So to be clear and fair to everyone, 70% of homes have pets or assistance animals in them here in our country. 91% of pets, for the surveys that do differentiate, 91% of that population are going to be pets. 9% should be assistance animals. And then of that 9%, only 7% should be a service animal, with the other 93% being a support animal. So that's some of the stats right there. But let me also share, we as a company at Pet Screening, we process the reasonable accommodation requests for our client friends. And we've received, actually, I need to update this slide, probably north of 800,000 reasonable accommodation requests in our Mooresville offices, digitally, of course, but in our Mooresville, North Carolina offices for the rentals that we serve. We're in over 6 million rentals around the country. And so what we have found is that really only about 4 out of 10 of the reasonable accommodation requests make it all the way fully across the line that begin with us as a reasonable accommodation request. And what we're also seeing in terms of why is this growing is how much it's growing. In the 20 years prior to 2015, when you compare what was requested in those 20 years for reasonable accommodations to the years that followed, 2015 to 2019, when this was studied, there was a 200% increase in that 4 or 5 year period versus the prior 20 years. So if you're wondering why this is growing or seems to be growing, you're correct, it's growing. And these are some of the data points that I think reflect some of why it's growing. Now, of course, we all know, I'm going to speak to the grace of this and facilitate from a graceful perspective, but do know, I also know, having been a property manager for many years, and seeing our statistics here at Pet Screening, many of these are not fully HUD compliant reasonable accommodation requests for the disabled, right? So we do know that as well. And we do recognize it's become quite the TikTok game, if you will, in terms of how to avoid your pet policies, practices, or pricing. That said, I'll continue to facilitate from a place of grace, and we'll talk about these in their most genuine sense as we spend our time together. Let's hit fair housing, past, present, and future. So Of course, we've had some anniversaries of late, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. Our civil rights activists and supporters achieved the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, signed by President Lyndon Johnson. Then that landmark act was expanded in 19. Then it included Title VIII, which became known as the Fair Housing Act. With that, we received 4 federally protected classes. A few years later, in the 70s, we received an additional federally protected class. And then in 1988, the Fair Housing Act was amended, and we received 2 more federally protected classes. So altogether, we now have 7 federally protected classes, which are shown on the screen. I like to help my client friends and folks who come and attend a session with us to remember these by a sentence I came up with. It's relevant, of course, to our work together today. Renters can now really sue for discrimination. So that will help you remember your 7 protected classes moving forward. Now, of course, your local municipalities, counties, and or your state may have additionally federally protected classes, and I encourage you to research that if you have not already, and to certainly be on top of all of your protected classes. But the Fair Housing Act is what we're going to talk about today, and it includes these 7 federally protected classes, and it protects people from discrimination when they are renting or buying a home, getting a mortgage, or seeking housing assistance, or engaging in other housing-related activities. And it covers most housing. There's very limited circumstances where an owner might be exempt. The one that comes to mind is if you have a 4-plex and you are the owner and you live in one of those 4 units. In context for the focus of this session, though, we're going to talk about the what, the who, and the why. So the Fair Housing Act makes it unlawful for a housing provider to refuse to make a reasonable accommodation. That is the what, the reasonable accommodation. For a person with a disability, that is the who. These are not made for everybody anytime, right? For a person with a disability, that's your who. And why? Because they need that accommodation in order to have a more equal opportunity to use and enjoy their rental property. So again, the reasonable accommodation is the what, the individual with the disability is the who, and the why is to afford these individuals a more fulsome opportunity to use and enjoy their rental property that you all are offering to them. Think of this as a helpmate to bridge the gap in abilities. Your renters who are disabled and their ability to use the home and or any other amenities that might be associated with it might be here. Your renters without disabilities and their ability to use and enjoy their home and or any amenities associated with it might be here. And so what stands in the gap to help these disabled renters more fully enjoy the home that they're renting and or any amenities associated therewith? And this is where we come to reasonable accommodation for the purposes of our conversation today. Now, one of the things I want to highlight as we begin is I'm sharing the history, but I also want to share the present. HUD released a notice on this particular topic. It's the Assistance Animals Notice, and you can look it up online, but it's also going to be in your workbook. And it's called the FHEO, Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice. You'll find it on the HUD webpage, but again, in your workbook as well. And it was written to clarify the rights and obligations for all of us, for we landlords, but also to help inform the requesters regarding assistance animals and the requesting of a reasonable accommodation of this kind. So that's the present, but also in the present. And we're going to be focusing on that a lot today, but also in the present, still we're talking about the Fair Housing Act as amended, and we're also have to factor into our decision-making process, the joint statement from the Department of Justice and HUD. So there are 3 things to consider really whenever we're having this conversation about assistance animals, furry fair housing, if you will. We've got the legislation, we've got the joint statement, and we've got the most recent HUD notice that supersedes prior notices. Interestingly, this HUD notice came out in 2020. It was the first notice of 2020, as evidenced by the numbering I gave you. 2020-01 is the first notice for 2020. This was the first notice since 2013. So there was a 7-year time span during which this again rose to the #1 HUD complaint topic. So let's dive in. We're going to talk about the who and the what. Most of my slides are designed with minimal verbiage on them so that you are taking notes, because that will be part of the glue for these materials today and this information. These next two slides, though, are very complete because they are the crux and core of this conversation. And I do not want you to forget any portion of these or to fail to take all the notes you should for these. Absolutely critical we get these 2 points right. Who we said is a disabled individual, and the why of it is so that they can use and enjoy their rental property more like a non-disabled renter could, right? So how do we define a disabled individual? So it's a person with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life functions, and or is on record or regarded as being disabled, and for the purposes of our conversation is requesting a reasonable accommodation. Now, one form of on the record or regarded as being disabled might be that the individual has Social Security disability or veterans disability or other disability related benefits or income. And then you would know they're on the record or regarded as being disabled. The what is the reasonable accommodation. It's a change, exception, or adjustment to a rule, policy, or practice, just as the slide says. And it's necessary for the disabled individual to help establish a more equal opportunity to use and enjoy, right? It's what we're using right here to bridge this gap between your disabled renters and your non-disabled renters in their ability to use and enjoy the homes so that they're all renting from you. So again, it's a change, exception, or adjustment to a rule, policy, or practice, and it does include the public and common use spaces if you have a rental community that offers any of those. And it goes to the root of what we do, ensuring customers can use and enjoy their homes. Specific to that today, of course, we'll be going over reasonable accommodation requests for assistance animals, and you'll hear the term reasonable quite a bit. HUD has not told us what is reasonable, but they have given us in the whole fair housing world a few examples of what might be unreasonable, one of which would seem to apply to this topic. And it's one that creates a direct threat. So an accommodation might not be considered reasonable if it creates or presents a direct threat in your rental building. So with that, please don't say, great, then I can mark off all Dobermans and Rottweilers and Pit Bulls as reasonable accommodations for the disabled as assistance animals. That would be an incorrect assumption. We'll talk more about why that would be incorrect. And we'll also talk about how this does apply and when it might be correct. So just kind of put that in the garden. We're going to let that grow a little bit in the garden and we'll talk more about it. But again, HUD has said one thing that might not be a reasonable accommodation is one that creates a direct threat. So, let's stop here for just a second and review some language before we continue on. In this notice, the FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice that we're going to talk about for the next 3 slides, we received language and it was clarifying and I think very helpful for the industry. And the language here that you'll hear me using and you'll see on the slides is assistance animals. Assistance animal is the overarching, if you will, umbrella terminology if I were holding an umbrella. And underneath the umbrella, we have 2 types of assistance animals. We have service animals and we have support animals. The legislation that we'll, of course, speak most about is the Fair Housing Act. Your regulatory partner to help you succeed in following that is going to be the Department of Housing and Urban Development, unless they have contracted with somebody in your area to receive these fair housing complaints other than they, which does sometimes happen in South Carolina. It's the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission for communities that are not HUD subsidized, conventional rentals, if you will. The other type of legislation that does come up when you have a community that has areas open to the public, such as the rental office in a multi-unit community, that type of legislation, again, is ADA, and the regulatory partner to help you with that is the Department of Justice. And that's why you'll see there's a joint statement from DOJ and HUD, because they're right here together on this. And there's a dividing line in terms of the areas open to the public, but they are definitely both responsible for helping ensure compliance with the Fair Housing Act as well as ADA. So these are the 2 regulatory partners, and these are the 2 pieces of legislation and the 2 types of assistance animals that became very clear to us in the most recent HUD notice. Let's jump into that for the next 3 slides. So the FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice, I mentioned this briefly earlier, has a really unique construct in my experience with HUD notices. This HUD notice was written for both us, the housing providers, as well as for the requesters of this reasonable accommodation, i.e. your applicants and or renters, right? So the first part of the guide is for us, for housing providers, what is needed when we are assessing a request. And the second part is for the requesters themselves, intended for them to give to whomever they're going to ask to help them with their support animal documentation, because that's where documentation is allowed, support animals, and or for themselves to understand what we're allowed to ask and have in the processing of assistance animal accommodation requests. So assistance animals in housing are one of two things. They are a service or a support animal. This gets a little more complicated in California, but you guys are not in California, so we'll keep it simple to your state. So far as I know it, in Illinois, a service animal is a dog trained for a task for the disabled. Only in California, to my knowledge, have they said other animals can be a service animal other than a dog. So in your state, it's a dog trained for a task for the disabled. And since it's only dogs that are trained for a task, if the animal happens to be trained for a task, but it's not a dog, it's going to automatically come over to the support animal side. And that's why the definition says trained or untrained animals that do work, because if they're not a dog, they're in this column, perform tasks in this column because they're not a dog, or this is the one you hear the most, provide therapeutic emotional support to the requester. Our industry has dubbed these ESAs, emotional support animals. So again, assistance animal is the overarching umbrella terminology, service and support. Service animal, a dog trained for a task for the disabled. Support animals, other animals that are trained but not dogs, and or animals that provide therapeutic emotional support only. By contrast, pets are not protected generally across the country, although we are seeing a lot more suggested proposed legislation on this topic. Generally, as landlords, you can deny pets. You can have your own policy about what pets you will restrict. Our clients have what we call zero FIDO score customizations for pets based upon if they have breed restrictions or weight restrictions or age restrictions or spay or neuter restrictions or bite history restrictions. So service and support animals, though, different than your pets, and that'll definitely be part of the focus of our conversation today. This HUD notice also provided clarity in addition to that language and what each animal is and how this notice was written. It also provided clarity on what we call household or domesticated pets versus unique pets. And I really appreciate this, and this is a great spot for your note taking, because I'm going to read to you a list of common household domesticated pets that are traditionally kept in the household for pleasure. So here we go. Dogs, cats, and small birds. Give you a second to write that down. Dogs, cats, small birds, rabbits, hamsters, and gerbils. And then other rodents. I had renters who had fancy rats for their children, really swore by them, thought they were great pets. So again, we're up to dogs, cats, small birds, rabbits, hamsters, gerbils, other rodents, fish, or the one reptile to make the cut, every kid's best friend, a turtle. So those are the animals that HUD delineated in this FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice as being traditionally kept in the home for pleasure and considered domesticated. Other animals that are not on this list or traditionally kept in the home for pleasure are considered unique animals. And some of them are so unique that they're also barnyard variety animals, meaning they're not intended to be kept in the home at all. And the individual requesting a barnyard variety unique animal should be applying to live in housing that includes some amount of fenced in exterior yard, not to be confused with that 5x8 or 6x10 patio, so to speak, that might be associated with a rental. A true fenced-in yard should be the litmus test for somebody with a barnyard variety animal. But let's back into the unique animals. If somebody has a unique animal request, according to this notice, you can choose, provided you choose to deploy your policy equitably and consistently, you can choose to raise the bar for a unique animal request. For instance, HUD provides examples. You could say that you want to see the documentation. Of course, these are not dogs, so they're by default support animals, and that's where documentation can be required. So you could say that in that documentation for a support animal of the unique animal variety, that you must receive information that declares the individual is allergic to other domesticated options, meaning that's why they have gone to the side of a unique animal request, gone to that extent, right? So they're allergic. And then secondarily, that the animal, without that particular animal, that requester, the symptoms associated with their disability would substantially increase. So again, you can apply a greater standard to a unique animal request. One, that the requester is allergic to other options. And two, that animal is pretty important because without it, the symptoms associated with their disability would substantially increase. Again, these are not household pets. And again, you can raise the bar, meaning that bullet that says substantial burden to demonstrate need. Another item that became clear in this HUD notice is the multiple animal request. Now, we have an entire assistance animal team here at Pet Screening, made up of assistance animal reviewers, assistance animal authenticators, and attorneys who work with this team. And in our reading of this FHEO 2020-01 assistance animal notice, we believe it was made clear that we as landlords have the right to individually assess each assistance animal request for the nexus. And how do we define nexus? That's a connection between the disability and the disability-related need. For instance, and I'm going to make an exaggerated example, a person who is deaf does not need a seeing eye dog, correct? So exaggerated example, but there's no nexus there. So it's very clear. So that's why I like to use that one. But there should be a nexus, a connection between the disability and the request, i.e. a disability-related need for this assistance animal, and that you have the right to assess each requested animal individually, that each animal should ameliorate one or more of the symptoms associated with the disability distinctly and uniquely from any other assistance animal the same requester might be requesting. So I often received reasonable accommodation requests for, fill in the blanks, 3 or more cats or dogs, 3 or more emotional support animals. That was fairly routine in my experience with my portfolio. You may have experienced that as well. To put this in context, we believe this notice says that you have the opportunity to basically inquire without, you have a limited inquiry allowed, but to basically inquire with the requester, or to say to them, it may not be considered reasonable to request multiple animals to perform the exact same function. I would like information, at least a clarification, that each animal does have a distinct and individual nexus and distinct benefit for you, each one different than the other. And to get that information back. And that's what we do on behalf of our clients. Now, again, with that, we then would assess individually for the distinct and different need. They may or may not tell you what each animal specifically does, but the documentation for these support animals should clearly delineate. Each animal has a different and distinct benefit for the disabled requester at a minimum. You may get the actual nexus itself, though, but sometimes providers will shy away from that because they are conveying sometimes clearly then the individual's disability-related information, and that's not information that we have a right to. All right, so there could be that substantial increase in burden for these unique animal requests, and I just want to make sure that's clear. And again, the nexus for a multiple animal request should be expressed, that each one is distinct from the other. If it doesn't go all the way to sharing what that nexus is, at least sharing that each is unique. Last slide for this particular HUD notice in our conversation today before we get into the pathways and components and then the outcomes. Just a couple of points for you here before we move on. HUD said in the fact sheet for this notice, and I thought this is some of the clearest language I've seen from HUD in my career in property management, that the internet certificates and documentation that requesters are purchasing are not worth what the public is paying for them. In this particular section of the notice and fact sheet, when you read this, they're clearly talking about not all of the individual documentations that people can acquire online through online telemedicine and provision of online health-related services. They're not talking about those. They're talking about the certificates for the animals themselves. So if you receive that emotional support animal certificate that sometimes comes with a raised seal, maybe even the picture, I used to call them doggy identification cards or doggy driver's licenses, because sometimes they would have literally a driver's license with a picture of the animal on it. Those items that speak only to the animal itself, whether it's a certificate or the license or the vest or the collar, none of those things tell you that the requester has a non-visible disability and a disability-related need for the assistance animal. That's the crux of this entire conversation. If they have a visible disability, you're not looking for disability confirmation in the documentation at all. Then if the nexus is not obvious, you're only looking for the disability-related need to be confirmed, right? But backing into this specific bullet point again, HUD has said those documents and certificates are not worth what the public's paying for them, because a document or certificate about the animal itself does not tell you that their owner has a non-visible disability and a disability-related need for an assistance animal. When we receive those from our requesters on behalf of our clients or in the interactions that we're engaging in on behalf of our clients, we immediately push back on those and do what I call a push and pull. Push out information as to why those are insufficient, referencing HUD's language, referencing the FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice, and working to pull in better information from these requesters for our clients. The next bullet point, truth and accuracy. Now, many years ago, there were fair housing conciliations on this whole topic of furry fair housing. One of those, the byproduct of it, was a form. One that had a truth and accuracy statement in it that we could provide to requesters, and they could take to whomever is going to process a document for them to aid them with their support animal accommodation request. And that documentation, again, had a truth and accuracy statement in it. Lo and behold, a number of years later, HUD has gone back and said through this FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice, we landlords can provide a document to these requesters to help them through the process if they don't have any documentation to offer for a support animal, and they've asked you for assistance and said, I don't have anything, what do I need? Can you give me anything to start with? You can provide them with a statement that they can take to their provider of their documentation that does have truth and accuracy declarations on there. But HUD has come out and said, you must be requiring truth and accuracy in your underlying business transaction for everyone, so that you're not just raising the bar for the disabled. They alone have to attest to truth and accuracy of all the customers, renters that you might be working with. That would be inappropriate. So HUD has said you can have that language in documentation if you do provide documentation to your requesters. If you have it, though, they're going to ask you if your underlying business transaction requires truth and accuracy from all of your applicants and renters. And if you're inclined to say, of course, their next question, likely, take this from a pro practitioner, will be to ask you to show it to them. If that language is in this particular document, they'll ask you to show it to them in other documentation that would be provided to non-disabled renters, I promise. All right, and lastly, legislation regulations are not meant to be retroactive. So when this came out in 2020, they stated specifically in this notice that it was not retroactive. All right, with that, let's talk about the request journey, the pathways and components. With reasonable accommodation requests, there are two pathways to these requests and two components. For the pathways, there are both service and support animals, as we have spoken about. And then the components are the disability and the disability-related need that we've already hit on, but we'll close up that point of the conversation a little bit more in this section. So let's talk about the pathways first. For your service animal requests, again, remember earlier the numbers, 70% of homes have pets or animals, 91% of those should be pets, 9% should be assistance animals. Of that 7% might be, we're getting really small, your service animals. So you won't see these very often. I can count on my hands in probably 10 years, count on my 10 fingers rather, in all the years I've been in property management, the service animal requests that I've received, I would say, maybe slightly more than that. But they're amazing when you see these requests and receive them. Here's what happens though with this particular pathway. These two requests, service and support, are handled differently. That's why I refer to this as two pathways, because you're going to travel differently down each one. On the service animal pathway, in accordance with this FHEO 2020-01 Assistance Animal Notice, it became clear that you were to ask two questions and to evaluate the two answers and to determine how you move forward from there. The one additional question that we ask in our process, though, is, has the animal ever bitten someone? Because HUD has said an animal that poses a direct threat, remember that from earlier? Something that poses a direct threat might not be a reasonable accommodation. So asking if the animal has bitten someone in the past and then evaluating what that instance was, if they say yes, is certainly reasonable to factor into this process. Aside from that, two questions, two answers. Is the animal necessary for a person with a disability? And what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? You cannot require training certificates or healthcare provider confirmations for these service animals. No documentation, in fact. According to the most recent HUD notice, you're to ask these two questions. If the answer to the first one is yes, and the answer to that second one is maybe you're exchanging information electronically with this applicant or renter and you're unaware, yes, I am visually impaired and this animal has been trained to guide me. Or yes, is the animal necessary for a person with a disability? Yes, what work or task? My animal has been trained to alert me to impending seizures, so I sit down instead of fall down. Imagine the value in that. Or yes, my animal has been trained as a psychiatric assistance animal. Or yes, my animal has been trained to de-escalate or relieve emotional breakdowns is the language I would use. So you do have psychological service animals, not just physical service animals. But again, 2 questions, 2 answers. Is the animal necessary for a person with a disability? What work or task has the animal been trained to perform? I also recommend asking consistently of both pet and assistance animal parents, has your pet or assistance animal ever bitten a person? If they say yes, asking for details and determining in this round, when we're talking about assistance animals, does the information revealed in that bite history communication reveal that animal, if admitted to your rental, would pose a significant threat? Now, the second pathway, the wider of the 2 pathways, is a support animal. Again, you're asking the same questions. You're looking for essentially those answers, but you're allowed to look for this in the documentation that they would share with you. For our clients and friends, everything is done digitally, so our requesters are uploading their support animal documentation, and our assistance animal team is reviewing it for our assistance animal reviewers. Is reviewing it for 4 things that you have a right to, and I'll review those for you so you too can look for those things. So you have a right to see documentation that is from a healthcare provider or other professional or person in the know or reliable third party. That's taking into context both the HUD notice as well as the joint statement from DOJ and HUD. So again, it's not just healthcare providers, it's healthcare providers or other professionals or other persons in the know or qualified third parties, right? Knowledgeable third parties, I think is the exact language. So you have a right to documentation from somebody in those categories, if you will, that in the documentation confirms that they are aware of the individual's disability and disability-related needs and conditions, confirms that the individual is disabled. We'll hit a footnote on that on the next slide, and confirms that the individual does have a disability-related need for the request. Now, the 5th thing that you have a right to, HUD says, is reliable documentation. So our assistance animal reviewers are looking for these 4 things. When they're able to check those boxes, and this could be a formula you apply, then an assistance animal authenticator jumps in, contacts the provider of the documentation to authenticate. That provider produced that document for that requester with that date on it. They're authenticating only those pieces. It's a limited inquiry, not delving into the length or duration or type of relationship between the requester and the person providing the documentation at all. So at the end of the day, though, we're evaluating for those components to see if this is a reasonable accommodation request for the disabled. And again, the requested animal could do work or perform tasks, but it's not a dog, so it's here on the support side, or provide therapeutic emotional support for the requester. That's most often what we receive here. And again, we're up over 800,000 reasonable accommodation requests. So the bulk of what we see are emotional support animals. But that's not, again, think back to our statistics, an unreasonable thing when you think about it. 26% of adults having a physical disability, 40% of adults potentially having a mental or emotional or substance use disorder and disability. All right, so I said there were 2 pathways and 2 components, and the components are, is the disability obvious, and is there a nexus, right? So actually the components are disability and disability-related need for the assistance animal. But relevant to that, I'm gonna ask, is the disability obvious, or are they known or regarded and that's known to you? If that's true, the disability is obvious, or they're known or regarded as being disabled and that's known to you, then you're not looking for confirmation of disability. Remember, that was the 4th thing that you're looking for in a support animal documentation. You're not looking for that at all in the documentation if you are visually confirming they're disabled or they're known or regarded as being disabled, right? And on the service animal side, Again, you're not seeking to confirm that at all. You're just getting the answers to the questions that confirm that. But in the documentation, this is especially important. If it's visually confirmed for you or they're known or regarded as being disabled, please don't be concerned that you don't have enough documentation because you don't have confirmation of disability when it's already known to you or confirmed by you visually. Next, the nexus. So we have the disability and the disability related need for the assistance animal. Sometimes, as in a seeing eye dog, the disability and the disability related need are both right there in front of you. And there's nothing else you need to do really, except but potentially have them sign off on an assistance animal addenda, where you are expressing to them their obligations to care for the rental property, right? And to conduct their animal appropriately, like any pet owner, for instance, would. So again, is a disability obvious, or are you aware that they're known or regarded? And or the nexus. What is that nexus? Is there at least knowledge? Are you at least knowledgeable that there is a nexus or a connection between the disability and disability related need? And if it is clear to you, all of that is clear to you, then you're moving on. You may see somebody also, as another example, in a wheelchair with a larger assistance animal helping to pull them forward, for instance. And then again, the disability and the disability related need are both clear to you. All right, let's hit the request journey, the process and the outcomes. We're closing in on this. Thank you guys for hanging in with me. There's a $100,000 lesson for you guys, so don't leave, right? All right, the request process. What do we do when we have all this information now? Where does this leave us? Let's hit a few key points before we move on. Number one, we have a legal duty to consider all requests. Please have resting fair housing face if someone comes to you and says, I would like to request 8 emotional support chihuahuas. That is a real thing. I have heard of that happening. And your response is, it's my pleasure and my duty to consider all reasonable accommodation requests. And today marks the start of an interactive process, which HUD defines as a good faith dialogue between you and I. That's how I always began my reasonable accommodation request communications. So, couple other key points. Can you require your documentation in lieu of their own and say to them, I don't need your documentation. I have these forms I'd like you to fill out and to get completed for us. HUD told me, I'm going to share it with you. You have a right to reliable documentation, not your own. Take whatever documentation for a support animal they would like to offer you. Of course, remember, we're not asking for documentation for a service animal. On the support side, take whatever documentation they'd like to offer you, evaluate that documentation. You're only asking for additional documentation if what you need, those items that we talked about earlier, those items are not present in the support documentation, then you're asking for additional documentation to clarify the remaining points that were not hit in the original document. Can you ask about the details of their disability? Absolutely not. I'm sure most folks on the call would know that. You have this paperwork in hand. What next? In this HUD notice, HUD tells the requesters that essentially you landlords have a 10-day timeline, a best practice, they call it, within which they would like to see you responding to these requesters. It may not be the ultimate yes or no, but they do want to see you continuing the interactive process and not having any gap in time of longer than 10 days. And they call that a best practice. But they do go on to tell the requester on the 11th day, the requester can act as though you have rejected their request. So I call that a timeline, even though HUD says it's a best practice. What's next? How do you move forward with these? Well, I like to think in terms of nothing, something, or everything. Nothing is rejecting the request. Everything is approving it. Something in the middle is continuing the interactive process. But before we get there, let's review again. On the support animal side, what are you looking for in the documentation? Ultimately, you're looking for documentation that is reasonable, reliable, if you will. So reliable documentation from a healthcare professional, other credible third party is HUD's language, confirming personal knowledge of the requester, confirming disability and disability related need. And at the end of the day, it's you all who get to stand in judgment and say whether or not it's reasonable. Remember though, it's very easy, just a few clicks to complete a fair housing complaint. So you'll of course undertake this with the seriousness with which it should be undertaken. And again, your options are nothing, something, everything. Reject the reasonable accommodation request, approve it, or continue the interactive process. What does that look like? If you're thinking about denying the request, the clearest reason for that is the requester is not visibly known to you, not known to you to be on the record or regarded as, and there's nothing in the support animal documentation that says they are disabled. We are talking about federal civil rights, for the disabled, not for folks who have an inconvenient level of allergies or are trying to get their A1C down and need to walk more often, so they want a dog. We're talking about federal civil rights for the disabled. If you haven't visually confirmed they're disabled, you're not aware they're known or regarded as disabled, and the documentation for their support animal doesn't say they're disabled, that's the clearest reason for a denial. Or you could have confirmation of disability, but noting that the documents needed for the reasonable accommodation are lacking a few details, right? Maybe they don't go to the extent of telling you what the nexus or the connection is between the disability and the request is. And so at that point, you're continuing the interactive process, the good faith dialogue. We do that a lot for our clients. A good example is, I remember looking at our system, and one of the requesters had provided us with that certificate from the emotional support animals of the United States of America. And HUD said those are not worth what the public's paying for them. So we engaged in a push and pull, and we asked for additional information. And that individual gave us their documentation from the Veterans Affairs Office. If you've ever seen those, it lists all the different body parts and the different percentages of disability for each body part. Reading that document clearly, and I'll call him Joe, clearly Joe was disabled. But that didn't tell us Joe had a reasonable accommodation need or a nexus for an assistance animal. Told us only that he was disabled, not that he has a need for an assistance animal accommodation for his disability. So we did that last push and pull, and that's when we got that information. Meanwhile, that was us continuing the interactive process, not just saying no because we haven't hit all the marks yet, but continuing the interactive process. A great place to be while you're requesting reasonable additional information because the information you have so far has fallen short. Okay, so that is something that gives you a few examples that give you an idea of why you would deny and or how to continue the interactive process, the good faith dialogue. Another one on that, though, I do want to say, let me back up. Let's say, and I'll use Joe again, Joe comes in with his dog, and you can tell Joe's dog is barely being contained and controlled by Joe. And of course, ask Joe, Joe, has your assistance animal ever bitten a person? Again, if you're doing that consistently for all pets and assistance animals, I think that is something you can do because HUD has said one request that might not be reasonable is a request that poses a direct threat. And Joe says, yes, Bruno here has bitten a person, and you can see Bruno's barely contained. This is a good spot also to continue the interactive process to say to Joe, I don't find that Bruno is a reasonable accommodation for your disability, a reasonable accommodation for us to grant because Bruno clearly poses a direct threat. You're barely able to control him, and he does have a bite history. But we'd like to continue the interactive process with you and to ask you, Joe, do you have another animal that might ameliorate the symptoms associated with your disability? If so, let's have that conversation. Let's continue the interactive process because we're unable to approve Bruno, but we'd like to continue the interactive process with you so that we can move forward trying to help you find a way to ameliorate one or more of the symptoms associated with your disability. If everything is check, 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 all 5 of those things that we talked about earlier, or it's a service animal and the 2 questions are answered brilliantly, yes, my animal is necessary for a person with a disability, and my animal has been trained to help awaken me during night terrors, for instance. That's another great example of a service animal. So if the questions are answered brilliantly or the documentation sufficient, the request is approved. My suggestion for you here is please don't have them sign any documentation that calls their assistance animal in any way, shape, or form a pet. Please don't have them sign off on any documentation that uses that language with regard to their assistance animal. Some folks have a pet/assistance animal addenda, and then they write 0 charges in for an assistance animal because you're not allowed to charge any of your normal fees or deposits for an assistance animal. There can't be any financial barrier to the entrance of these assistance animals. You can't require them in particular to have renter's insurance that covers that animal. You can't charge them a monthly pet fee or initial pet fee or an initial pet deposit of any kind, any more than you would if they were coming into your community with a walker or a wheelchair. Obviously, a walker or a wheelchair helps assist the disabled, right? Ameliorate the symptoms associated with their disability, helping them engage in their major life functions. You wouldn't dream of charging them anything for that. So if you'll use that philosophy and that kind of line of thought, you'll make great decisions in this area as well. All right, here's the $100,000 bonus. I am sure in all the years I was in property management, I lost sight of this too. So I'm going to share this with you all. The original legislation, remember I said there's at least 3 things that you're supposed to be keeping your eye on here. And that is the intersectionality between the original legislation, the joint statement between DOJ and HUD, because they are jointly responsible for fair housing enforcement, as well as the HUD notice, the most recent HUD notice, right? So these three things, if you want to picture three circles interacting with one another, are how you're moving forward and evaluating these requests and deciding how to proceed. But that original legislation made it clear that this was all about the rights of your disabled renters, and here's the big part, and or disabled individuals associated with your renters. The most expensive case on this slide is the September 2021 case for $100,000. And let me just say, you all, I'm sure, are aware of this. If you engage in a settlement of $100,000, that doesn't begin to cover or really total up to the financial impact of that particular suit or complaint for you. You've got your time and treasure involved. You've got attorney's fees involved, and you've got that $100,000 settlement. And likely, if you're engaging in a settlement of that kind, HUD's got additional requirements of you moving forward in terms of them monitoring and or your additional education that they're going to have you take. So $100,000 is just a portion of what that case cost these folks, when what they did was the renter was known to be in a no-pet household. A member of the renter's family, a disabled individual associated with your renter, disabled family member, was coming over routinely to the rental property and bringing an assistance animal. But they didn't know it was an assistance animal. They just knew that there was an animal visiting. They made contact with the renter. The renter said, "That's my daughter's assistance animal." And essentially what she got back from her landlords was that she's not their renter. And I know many folks would make this mistake in property management. I can't tell you I didn't at some time in the past. I spent 35 years in property management. So if you lose sight of that original legislation, it can be very, very costly. Remember, this is intended for disabled renters and or those disabled individuals associated with them. What they should have said to the mother was, all right, our lease does say you're supposed to have advance written authorization to have any pet or assistance animal, because your lease language should say that. Within our community, you don't have advance written authorization. There is a lease violation going on here, but we'll press pause on that. And we'd like you and your daughter to engage in our reasonable accommodation request process. Together, you can complete a reasonable accommodation request for your daughter and share that with us so that we can consider this request for a reasonable accommodation for the disabled. That's where the conversation should have gone, not this is a lease violation only and she's not our renter. And it's very costly to make that mistake. Again, your workbook includes the assistance animal notice, the fact sheet, a HUD policy memo from years ago on the whole restricted breed question that I usually get in my sessions, and of course, a copy of today's presentation. Together, I think that you could use your workbook and your notes from today to really work out conversations about this topic with your renters moving forward and keep this as a resource. Before I conclude, though, and ask for questions and have Erica join me back on screen to help moderate those with us, I do want to say not only thank you to CIC and Erica for bringing me here today, but to Pet Screening for allowing me as a Director of Education and Multifamily Enterprise Sales to be here with you today as a courtesy to CIC and other associations like CIC. I'm able to present for associations and companies all around the country on a multitude of topics, which I mentioned earlier as we got together at the beginning of the call. So I want to thank Pet Screening, and I want to mention to you all Pet Screening services, because today's time has been spent to help you be more consistent, confident, and graceful in the area of fair housing, furry fair housing, if you will, HUD's #1 complaint topic. But that is for folks who are not utilizing our services. Our clients, and we're only able to work for clients who receive both pets and assistance animals. Of course, everyone receives assistance animals, but not everyone is pet friendly. So our clients do need to be pet friendly. And when they are, we are their best furry friend on this side, best partner in this whole topic. We work with landlords who are pet friendly. We help them with their pet policy management, their pet data, their risk and revenue management, and all things pets and assistance animals. And for the assistance animal requesters, our team, as I mentioned, processes those reasonable accommodation requests. We do our work asking every applicant and renter to complete one or more of our 3 profiles. We have a no pet profile that explains to those no pet households what it really means to be a no pet household. We have household pet profiles that give you all the data you could want on a household pet, and we score those pets for how suitable or not they might be in your rental property. We have a 1 to 5 paw FIDO score, but you're in the driver's seat. You tell us what's a no, and we'll give those a 0. We have 5 areas of 0 FIDO score customizations. And then lastly, the whole assistance animal profile, just like the pet profile, no FIDO score, and the assistance animal reasonable accommodation request process. Everything else has been digitized and digital and centralized and easy to work with. The assistance animal request process, that is with our human infrastructure. And that is our biggest team here at Pet Screening, our whole assistance animal accommodation team. Now, with this, the way we do our work, we're going to help you control your liabilities or control your risk, if you will, see the opportunity to rent to pets and determine what you want to charge for that and increase that pet revenue. And again, we're going to process and authenticate those reasonable accommodation requests. So we're doing this work for our clients in a centralized, digitized fashion without requiring a contract from you and without billing you. It is the household pet profile that your household pet parents will pay for, $25 or $30 initially and annually. All 3 profiles are renewed every 12 months. So you have up-to-date information for your risk management. And so you're continually communicating with your renters as to your expectations of them in delivering a healthy and well-managed pet environment and assistance animal environment as well. It's those questions in these profiles, both household pet and assistance animal, that will help you deliver that healthier and better managed pet environment when we're asking them questions like, has your pet or assistance animal ever bitten a person? If it is a walkable pet, will you always walk it on a leash? Will you always clean up after it? Does it get routine veterinary care? All that information combines and runs through the algorithm for that FIDO score for your pets, and of course is available to you for your assistance animals. So again, 3 profiles and the process free to you, a nominal charge only to your pet parents. And today's session will be just great knowledge for you while we become your partner in processing these for you. So Erica, thank you for trusting your members to me. That is a great honor. 50 years doing what you all do and 25 educating them. I'm honored to be here with you today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask you to let me know what questions we have so I can really kind of wrap this up for everybody with a bow. I think the questions and answers sometimes give us the best learning opportunity of the session.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Victoria. I can say that the information was valuable, and I'll let the numbers speak. You didn't lose anyone. Everyone who joined us at the beginning stayed with us until the end. So I really appreciate you sharing this. So we do have just a few questions. I see applause going up, the reactions. So one question is, can we get the recording? So I am very happy to say that this will be added to our CIC YouTube channel. So again, that is CICchicago.com, and I'll share some more information about how to access our page in just a minute. So you'll have that. Another question, someone asked, can I just hire your company? How do you feel about that, Victoria? Can I hire you to just screen those prospects needing a service animal, or does everyone need to be screened?
So everyone does need to be screened, and you do have to welcome pets. The combination of the 3 profiles will keep your risk and revenue management, your pet and assistance animal policy management in check. Each one kind of counterbalances the other. The no pet profile, when they answer the affirmation questions and they have to check off, I understand and agree, I understand and agree. Sometimes they will go from that no pet profile, about 20% of the time, in fact, to a household pet or assistance animal submission when they start checking off that they understand and agree all that it means to be a no pet household, right? So these counterbalance and drive to one another. And so the no pet will send you pet and assistance animal profiles about 20% of the time, and the assistance animal profiles about 38% of the time or greater will pivot back to a pet as well. And so that's why all 3 of these working in combination present you with the right risk management system that is that woven, strand of 3, if you will. So it makes it so much stronger for you. And that's why we also too, because we charge only the household pet parents, that's why we must work with pet-friendly rental property owners, because otherwise we'll be working for you guys free of charge. And I know you're fabulous, but we can't quite go there.
Nice. Thank you for that. And also, just a side note, Victoria, I remember when I observed your presentation previously, there's also a benefit for even the renters who don't have pets, the benefit of your service is it's a reminder, like someone might move in and they don't have a pet, and then
Right.
at some point they decide to acquire a pet. So this is a way just to make sure everything is documented if things change. So
To your point, though, Erica, and you've made a great point, it's most important that they continue to check off. I understand and agree that absolutely no pet sitting or animal visitation for any length of time inside or outside my rental unit is permissible without advance written authorization. Because when I toured properties for 35 years, walking properties for workers' comp visits, REAC inspections, mortgage inspections, right? I would invariably, just walking and chatting with managers, I would invariably encounter residents, and the manager or I would say, "Hey, Joe, new pet, congratulations, in order." And the answer always included 4 words. "No, it's just my daughter's dog. It'll be gone this weekend." "No,
sure.
it's just my girlfriend's dog, a boyfriend's dog, mother, brother, sister, cousin, friend's dog. It'll be gone next week." The "no, it's just my's" can get you a 7-figure dog bite lawsuit just as easily as a known and documented pet or assistance animal. And so it's very, very important, as you said, to help benefit those renters without any pets, Erica, so that they know clearly what can get them in trouble and what's acceptable or unacceptable to you all. The best way to keep great renters is with great communication. One of my colleagues at Pet Screening said recently, clarity is kindness. And I
Yep.
love that. Like, it's just, I'm going to paint it on the wall.
Excellent. Wonderful. I do see there's one person who has a raised hand. If I could just ask you to please add your question to the chat and we'll get to you in just a second. So another question, and thank you for your time. Thanks for allowing us to go a bit over, Victoria.
Sure.
Um, how long does it take to process a support animal application? And can we rent to another person if approved before?
So I will tell you that the first come, first serve, first completed is going to be something you're going to have to really chat with your local attorneys about. I'm not telling you that you have to hold the property off rental for an unending period of time. HUD does say in this documentation that we need to get back to them within a 10-day time frame. We at Pet Screening seek to have these done in a 2 to 5 day business window. Most often we're in the 2 to 3 day window. I do think that we have to have a reasonable policy. Maybe you're processing an additional backup application, but I don't think that you turn around and say, "Well, they got done in 3 hours. You're going to take a day or two. I'm going to rent to them instead of you," because I see that having a disparate impact. And that theory has not only been in function at HUD, but has been codified by the Supreme Court. And so if you have a policy that's neutral on its face, hey, first come, first serve, but it has a disparate impact, it's always going to take longer to process an application that involves a reasonable accommodation request for the disabled. Always going to take a few minutes longer, a few hours, maybe a day or two. And so if you unreasonably restrict that and won't even hold the unit off property and not give it to someone else for even a 2 or 3 day window, I see that coming back to bite folks. But there's no black or white answer to that. There's no crystal clear answer to these questions. That's one, if you're adamant that that's too long to hold a property off, if you have somebody else with a prepared and readily acceptable application, I caution you to ask an attorney to double check you on that, because again, it will always take longer for the reasonable accommodation request included application than it will for one without. And that to me says disparate impact.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Just a couple more.
Yeah.
So I'm associated with a local RIA. Can we use your slides to provide initial training to our members on the complexity of this subject and then point the interested to you? Or maybe they could just invite you to do a webinar for them. So
Yes, yes. I would ask you please not to use my slides. I've spent 35 years in property management, and when I worked from 7:30 in the morning to 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon, I spent 9 years teaching at night to be able to facilitate for you like I did today, and to be able to write this session myself, to be able to facilitate it. So I'd ask you please to invite me. I'm happy to come and do it for you, and it's free of charge. So there's no reason to try to do this yourself. And I have been happy to present for RIA. Charles Tassel, your head of your national RIA, has been a longtime colleague in property management. I was heavily involved with the National Apartment Association and still remain a member of their legislative committee. I was their chairperson for PAC Ambassadors, Units Magazine, and legislation. So I love what we do together, and I'm happy to do that with RIA as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Are you integrated with Rent Manager software?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We have great integrations, Yardi, Appfolio, OneSite, Entrada, Rent Manager, Buildium. We have MRI. We have so many integrations that we're working with, and they're two-way API integrations. So we'll be able to pull some information out of the system and be able to push some information back into the system. And you can reach me, Victoria@petscreening.com. And if I'm not, I'm one of the directors of enterprise sales here at Pet Screening, in addition to being the director of education. If I'm not your point of contact, I'll find your point of contact and introduce you. Again, I'm Victoria@petscreening.com.
Excellent. One last question and then one comment. The question is, making sure I understand this, a visitor of a leaseholder may bring their support animal to the property.
Yes, they may, and you may in turn say you require, and your lease documentation requires that advance written authorization be provided to pets and or assistance animals that are coming to the community. But again, don't get aggressive with the lease violation. Press pause then and there, because HUD wants you to meet and greet with them right at the point you find them and not act as though, well, I'm not going to grant that accommodation because you didn't do it in advance. So it's just advisable to have that language in your documentation. Advance written authorization is required, but wherever you meet and greet and find that this is going on, press pause on a violation, engage in the reasonable accommodation request process, and move forward from there.
Excellent. Great. And then we'll close with this comment. Patricia says, a phenomenal presentation, very astute, engaging presentation.
Oh, Patricia, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. My next call is in 2 minutes, so I'm going to fly. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for welcoming me here, Erica. Congratulations on joining a team that is so amazing. 25 years of education in this space, 50 years of serving and helping ensure affordable housing. That is the biggest crises that we have going on in our country right now, affordable housing. I know you all are working to be invested, reliable, resourceful, and respectful. I hope I've been those things for you today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Victoria. Have a great day.
My pleasure. Bye-bye, everybody.
Wonderful. Before I lose the rest of you, just want to share with you, this is the way you can access our site. So we are Community Investment Corporation. We offer both in-person and virtual property management training. So even if you are not in Chicago or the area as we are, you can still sign up for our mailing list and you can have access to other webinars like this one, many of which we offer for free. So you can feel free to scan this QR code or you can visit CICchicago.com. We hope you join us. Please share this information and thanks so much. Have a great day.